The legend of the Flying Dutchman did not begin as a ghost story. It began as a voyage, one that should have been like countless others during the golden age of the Dutch East India Company, when wooden vessels carried spices, silk, and ambition across the treacherous waters between Asia and Europe. But sometime in the early 17th century, a Dutch ship returning from Java encountered a storm off the southern tip of Africa, a storm so violent, so relentless, that it carved itself into maritime history, and from that storm emerged a name whispered for centuries: Hendrik van der Decken, in other versions Jord Bernard Fouquet, a captain known for speed, for stubbornness, and for a fate darker than the ocean beneath him. This is the story of the curse that began it all. It was late winter when Van der Decken set sail from Java, the ship heavy with cargo, nutmeg, peppercorns, cinnamon, and porcelain. His crew, hardened by the months-long journey, longed for home. The Dutch Republic awaited them with warmth, wages, and rest. Van der Decken was not a cruel captain, but he was demanding. His ship had a reputation for unnaturally fast travel. Some whispered he had made a pact with the devil for favorable winds. Others claimed he had offended God with his arrogance. Whether any of that was true did not matter yet. What mattered was that the ship sailed straight toward the one place sailors feared more than any other, the Cape of Good Hope. A place where the Atlantic and Indian Oceans collided violently, where storms brewed out of clear skies, where waves rose like mountains and crushed ships with the ease of snapping twigs. And on that voyage, the Cape waited with open jaws. The first signs of the storm appeared on the horizon as a bruise-colored line. Van der Decken stood at the helm, scanning the sky. He recognized the danger instantly. He had sailed these waters before, but this storm grew faster than nature usually allowed, as though something unseen pushed it toward them. The wind picked up, ripping at the sails. The sky darkened into an unnatural shade. The sea, moments before calm, began to churn violently. Crewmen pleaded with their captain, "Sir, we must turn back. The Cape isn't passable tonight," but Van der Decken ignored them. He believed turning back was weakness. He believed storms could be conquered. He believed a skilled captain could defy even the sea itself. He ordered the crew to secure the rigging, pull the lines tight, and prepare to push forward into the chaos. Lightning cracked across the sky. The ship trembled under each thunderclap. Waves smashed against the hull like living beasts. And the men realized they were sailing into something far more dangerous than an ordinary storm. The storm grew so violent that the ship began to drift sideways, the sails snapping like gunfire. Water flooded the deck. One sailor was swept overboard before anyone could grab him. Another slipped, breaking his leg. Terror spread among them like fire. Still, Van der Decken refused to turn back. He shouted over the wind, "We will round this cape if I must sail until Judgment Day." The moment he said it, the winds dropped to an eerie silence, just for a second. Enough for every man on the deck to hear the words clearly, enough for the crew to feel the weight of something shift in the world around them. Then the storm returned with twice the fury. Some sailors crossed themselves, others muttered prayers. One collapsed to his knees, begging the captain to reconsider. But the oath had been spoken, a direct challenge to God, a declaration of pride or madness that could not be taken back. As the ship lurched violently, a sailor, driven by terror, attempted to take control of the wheel. Van der Decken reacted instantly, drawing a pistol and firing. The shot cracked through the storm. The man fell, bleeding across the wet deck. Silence followed, not from the storm, but from the crew. Their captain had crossed a line no leader should ever cross. He had killed one of his own men in the middle of the sea during a storm. After swearing an oath against heaven itself, several crew members dropped their weapons in despair. Others clung to the railings, crying out for divine mercy. Decken, panting with rage, turned back to the raging sea and screamed into the darkness, "I will not yield, not to the sea, not to God, not to anyone." In the flash of lightning, witnesses would later claim they saw something move within the storm, a shadow larger than the waves, a darkness looking back. And then came the voice. Not human, not the wind, low, echoing, carried by the storm itself. "So be it." Moments after the voice faded, a massive wave struck the ship, engulfing the deck. The men screamed as icy water dragged them underwater. The masts snapped like brittle bones. The sails tore away into the night. The hull groaned under impossible pressure. And then the ship began to sink, but not normally, not with the inevitability of death. It sank slowly, unnaturally, like something was pulling it down deliberately. The crew clung to the rigging, begging their captain to pray, to apologize, to repent. Decken stood motionless at the helm, eyes fixed on the storm. "I made my oath," he whispered, "and I will stand by it." The water swallowed them whole. Some said the men drowned that night. Others claimed their bodies were never found. But the next morning, when the storm cleared, the sea was empty. No debris, no survivors, no trace of a ship that large ever having been there. It was as though the ocean had consumed it entirely, or hidden it for a purpose. Weeks later, a merchant ship passing the Cape reported seeing a vessel drifting through the fog. Its sails were shredded, its hull glowed faintly, and a pale figure stood at the helm. When the merchant crew called out, the figure did not answer. Instead, the ship simply veered away, moving against the wind. The report was dismissed as exhaustion-induced hallucination. But over the next decades, more sightings followed. Ships reported receiving letters from desperate sailors with dates decades old. Others claimed the Dutchman led them into storms. Some swore that seeing the ship guaranteed death. A legend was born, not of a storm, not of a shipwreck, but of a captain who defied heaven and was forced to sail the world's oceans forever. Hendrik Decken's oath was fulfilled. He would round the Cape. He would sail endlessly. He would never reach land. Not until the end of time. The sea remembers. It remembers every ship that has sailed across its surface, every life claimed, every storm unleashed. But there is one ship it did not claim, one vessel that it did not allow to rest beneath its waves. After the night, Captain Decken challenged the heavens and vanished beneath the storm at the Cape of Good Hope. Reports of a strange ship began to surface among sailors of the Dutch, British, and French fleets. The descriptions changed slightly from voyage to voyage, but the essence remained the same. A ghostly vessel drifting through fog, glowing faintly, moving against the wind, untouched by time or decay. The sailors had a name for it within decades, the Flying Dutchman. Not a ship of wood and canvas anymore, but a ship of damnation, trapped forever between this world and the next. The earliest accounts came from Dutch East India officers in the late 17th century. They reported glimpsing a vessel emerging suddenly from thick mist during calm seas, moving with unnatural speed. One officer described it in his logbook. Its sails were torn to ribbons, but the ship cut through the water as if driven by a storm none of us could feel. Another wrote, "The ship glowed faintly, as though lit from within, and yet no lanterns were visible." The details painted an impossible image. Sails shredded but full of wind, a hull that glimmered with cold, bluish light. Crew members pale and motionless, staring from the deck, a ship that left no wake behind it. Sometimes it sailed beside other ships, keeping pace silently for miles. Other times it appeared directly in their path, forcing them to turn violently to avoid collision, only for the ghostly vessel to vanish instantly. The sea held a mystery, and sailors knew better than to ignore omens. As the legend spread, so too did descriptions of the Dutchman's crew. Men reported seeing figures on the deck, thin, skeletal, clothes whipping violently in a wind that did not touch their own sails. Some seemed translucent, others burned with a pale, cold fire. The most frightening detail shared across testimonies was their stillness. They never walked, never shouted, never worked the ropes, never moved at all. They simply stood, staring outward as if witnessing something beyond the horizon, something only the damned could see. On rare occasions, a figure would raise an arm as if calling for help. But those who approached always found the ship vanish before they made contact. The crew was trapped, alive and not alive, seen but unreachable, sailing endlessly with no port to offer rest. The ocean had taken their bodies. The curse had taken their souls. No detail unsettled sailors more than this. The Flying Dutchman moved against the wind, not just against it, through it, with an ease that defied physics, logic, and the experience of every mariner alive. In a time when wind determined life or death, seeing a ship glide freely through a gale was enough to drive hardened men to their knees in prayer. Witnesses wrote, "It sailed faster when the wind died. It climbed waves no vessel could survive. It glided sideways, as though pulled by unseen hands." These descriptions sparked a belief. The Dutchman was no longer bound to earthly forces. If anything, it was pulled forward by the curse itself, driven by Captain Decken's oath to sail until Judgment Day. The ship was not a vessel anymore. It was a punishment. Over time, sailors noticed a pattern. Storms often followed sightings of the Dutchman. Ships that crossed its path reported equipment failure, sickness, losing their course, or vanishing without explanation. By the early 18th century, British naval officers documented several incidents where sailors, terrified by fog-shrouded sightings, lost discipline, refused to work, or attempted mutiny. The Dutchman became known not just as a ghost ship, but as a bad omen, a harbinger of disaster. Any crew who spotted it were believed to be doomed within days. Some commanders tried to calm their men, insisting the stories were mere superstition, but logbooks from as far as the South Atlantic recorded the same chain of events. Sight the Dutchman. A storm hits. Something goes terribly wrong. Sailors believed the ship wasn't just cursed, it spread the curse to all who crossed its wake. As decades passed, a strange consistency emerged. Eyewitnesses from different countries, different oceans, and different centuries described a ship that never changed. Always 17th century Dutch design, always with tattered red sails, sometimes described as blood-colored. Always glowing faintly blue or green, always drifting just out of clear view, always appearing in storms or thick fog. This constancy puzzled historians and terrified sailors. Ships rot, paint fades, wood decays, ropes snap, metal rusts. But the Flying Dutchman existed outside time. To the living, it appeared frozen, as if trapped in the exact moment the curse fell upon it. A museum of a single tragic night, doomed to sail forever. The sea became both prison and purgatory for Decken and his crew. Some believed the ship could never touch land because the curse bound it to the ocean. Others believed the ship sometimes drew near to the shore, not to rest, but to search for salvation. Rumors began that every 7 years, the Dutchman was granted a single chance, a brief moment when the ship could approach land, a window in which the captain could step ashore, and a chance to find something he desperately needed, a woman who could love him faithfully until death, a soul pure enough to break the curse he had brought upon himself. But even this small mercy came with cruelty, for how could a damned man find true love, while cursed to roam the oceans with a ghostly crew? How could any mortal woman love someone not wholly alive? Most versions of the story end the same way. He searches, he hopes, he fails, and the voyage begins again. Centuries passed. Governments rose and fell, empires formed and crumbled, the oceans filled with iron ships, then steel ones, then engines and radar and satellites. But the Dutchman did not change. Sightings continued in 1803, 1835, 1881, 1911, 1942, 1959. A South African lighthouse keeper claimed to see it vanish in broad daylight. A British naval officer in 1881, later King George V, swore it crossed their bow. Fishing crews off Tasmania reported a glowing ship racing over waves that should have smashed it apart. No matter the century, the story remained the same. A ship lost to time, a crew lost to death, a captain lost to his own defiance, forever sailing, forever searching, forever damned. By the early 18th century, the Flying Dutchman was no longer just a whispered rumor among sailors. It had become a recognized terror of the sea, a ship that could not dock, a crew that could not a captain still bound by the oath he had shouted into the storm. But it was during this period that another element of the legend emerged, more supernatural, more terrifying, and far more personal. The Dutchman didn't simply appear. Sometimes it reached out, and the form of contact was one no living sailor could ever forget. Letters, messages, parcels, requests to deliver mail from people who had been dead for decades. The earliest known report comes from 1641, written in the logbook of the British merchant vessel Larkspur. According to the entry, a pale-faced crewman from a glowing ship hailed them through a break in the fog. He shouted in Dutch, asking if they would carry letters to their families in Amsterdam. The British crew refused to approach, but the Dutchman's sailor tossed a packet wrapped in oilskin across the water. It landed on their deck with a hollow thud. When the crew opened it later, they found several letters written in shaky handwriting, dates ranging from 1620 to 1637. Names of sailors who had been dead for years, ink that was fresh, not faded, and paper that seemed too dry for the soaking journey. The captain of the Larkspur, realizing the gravity of what they had accepted, threw the letters into the sea. Within 48 hours, a violent storm crippled the ship. Several men died. The captain never sailed again. The incident spread across port taverns from Cape Town to Lisbon, and with it, a new warning. Never accept letters from the Flying Dutchman, because delivering the message meant inheriting the curse. In 1687, the French vessel La Belle Espérance reported an encounter even more chilling. The lookout saw a strange, glowing ship approaching fast, too fast for the weak winds that night. The Dutchman's crew appeared on deck, unmoving, as if carved from wax. A tall figure, almost certainly Decken himself, raised a sealed envelope bound with red string. He shouted, "Take this to my wife in Rotterdam." But no voice should have been heard that clearly, not over that distance, not across such still waters. The French captain panicked. He ordered his men to fire a warning shot. But before the gun could be loaded, the ghost ship vanished into the fog. The next day, La Belle Espérance struck an unseen reef and sank with nearly all hands lost. The story spread across European ports, becoming part of a growing dossier of strange maritime occurrences attributed to the Dutchman. By 1740, belief in the Dutchman was so widespread that Dutch captains warned their crews specifically. If a ship glows blue in the fog, turn away, do not answer, do not speak, do not take what is offered. But the captain of the Dutch ship Zeewolf ignored this. According to survivor testimony, the Zeewolf encountered the Dutchman during a storm at the edge of the Cape. A glowing figure rowed a small dinghy toward them, another impossibility for a ghostly ship. He held a wooden box containing letters addressed to wives and children, all dated more than 80 years earlier, and a diary written by Decken himself. The frightened crew begged their captain to reject the offering, but he was a man of pride, unwilling to show fear before sailors. He accepted the box. That night, the Zeewolf was struck by a storm so sudden and violent that the mast split in two. The ship barely survived long enough to flee north. When the captain opened the box later, the letters inside were bone dry. The ink shimmered wet under the lantern light, but the diary was the worst. The last entry read, "The sea is our grave, the wind our jailer. Every 7 years we return, but no one will free us. If you hold this book, pray you do not share our fate." The captain panicked, threw the box overboard. The next day, the Zeewolf ran aground on the Skeleton Coast, a stretch of African shoreline so deadly that sailors called it the Sand of Skulls. Nearly the entire crew perished. Only one survivor lived to tell the tale, and his account cemented a new belief. The Dutchman was not just cursed, it was contagious. By the 19th century, sightings of ghost ships were rarely taken seriously, but in 1803, the British ship Bristol Star documented one of the most chilling encounters in maritime history. The Dutchman appeared during a calm morning. No fog, no storm, no wind. It simply materialized on the starboard side, drifting silently. The crew watched in horror as a figure raised a lantern and signaled for them to approach. The captain refused, but a curious deckhand named Elias Thorne ignored orders. In a small launch boat, he rowed toward the Dutchman. Witnesses swore they saw 2 ghostly sailors lean over the rail and hand him a bundle wrapped in sailcloth. Elias returned to the Bristol Star, clutching the package. He refused to say what was inside. That night, he locked himself in his quarters. By morning, he was gone. His door was locked from the inside. The porthole was open, and the package had vanished. Some claimed they heard him whispering to someone in the night. Others said they heard the sound of boots walking across the deck long after he disappeared. The Bristol Star recorded the event officially, and it became one of the most significant testimonies of the legend. Historians debate the meaning of these cursed messages. Were they cries for help, attempts to reconnect with loved ones long dead, proof the crew did not accept their fate, or part of the curse, forced to seek deliverance that would never come? But sailors believed something different. The Dutchman needed the living, not for salvation, but to spread the curse. Each time the letters reached human hands, tragedy followed. Ships sank, storms struck, men vanished. It was as if the ship wanted to share its fate, to drag others into the endless voyage. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the Dutchman's reputation had grown to mythic proportions. Captains diverted their routes to avoid areas where the ship had been sighted. Superstitious sailors refused to work on foggy nights, and any floating parcel, bottle, or chest found at sea was immediately burned. No one dared risk touching a message from the dead. The Flying Dutchman had ceased being a mere ghost story. It became a maritime warning. Defiance has consequences, and the sea remembers every oath. As sightings continued, the legend reached its next chapter, a moment when the cursed ship crossed paths with a young woman whose devotion would shape the myth forever. Through the centuries, sailors whispered about the Flying Dutchman as a cursed phantom vessel, an omen of death, a warning from the deep. But in one version of the legend, preserved most clearly through Wagner's opera Der Fliegende Holländer, 1843, the story took a different turn. A human turn, a tragic turn. This is the chapter of the legend where the Flying Dutchman briefly escapes the eternal storm and crosses paths with a mortal woman whose devotion becomes the key to his salvation, or his doom. It was a night in the North Sea, near the rocky coastline of Norway, when the ship of Captain Daland, a merchant sailor seeking safe harbor, encountered a storm so violent it seemed ripped from the pages of myth. Waves rose like black towers, lightning carved jagged wounds across the sky, the wind howled like a living creature. Daland, a seasoned captain, ordered his crew to secure the sails and brace the masts. They steered toward a quiet inlet known as Sandviken Bay, a common shelter for sailors trapped in storms. As they entered the cove, the rain abruptly slowed, the winds fell silent, the sky cleared just enough for Daland to believe they had escaped, and then they saw it, a second ship, motionless, glowing faintly in the moonlight, anchored in the same cove, yet untouched by the storm that had nearly destroyed them. Its sails hung like tattered shrouds, its hull dripped no water, its masts towered unnaturally tall, silhouetted against the sky. Daland recognized it instantly, because every sailor alive knew what it was. The Flying Dutchman. Daland's crew begged him to turn back. "No good comes from meeting the Dutchman," they cried, but greed and curiosity outweighed fear. Daland believed the stories of treasure, cargo accumulated over centuries, never spent, never delivered, trapped aboard a ship that could not dock. He took a lantern and ordered a rowboat lowered. Against his crew's pleas, he rowed across the quiet water alone. As he approached, a solitary figure appeared at the rail, tall, pale, clad in an old Dutch naval coat that fluttered despite the still air. When Daland climbed aboard, the man spoke in a voice hollow with centuries of despair. "I am the captain of the Flying Dutchman. I seek not to harm you. I seek only release." His eyes held the exhaustion of 1,000 storms. Daland sensed no malice, only a suffering deeper than madness. Decken explained his fate, cursed at the Cape, doomed to sail eternally, allowed ashore once every 7 years. Desperate to find a woman loyal until death, only such a union could break the curse. Daland listened carefully, and in the trembling quiet between lightning flashes, the captain made him an offer. "Give me shelter, give me a chance, and I will give you wealth unimaginable." Daland agreed, not because he believed in curses, but because he believed in treasure. Daland returned home to his coastal village, bringing the Dutchman with him. And there, waiting in his modest home, was his daughter, Senta, a young woman with a haunted expression and a strange obsession, an obsession that would soon become prophecy. Pinned on her wall was an old portrait of the Flying Dutchman, painted decades earlier by a wandering artist who claimed he had glimpsed the cursed captain in a dream. The portrait showed a gaunt man with sorrowful eyes, standing on the deck of a ghostly ship, surrounded by mist that glowed faintly blue. Senta had stared at the portrait since childhood. She sang ballads about him. She spoke of him as if he were real. She believed, not hoped, not imagined, but believed that she was destined to save him. When her friends mocked her fascination, she simply answered, "His suffering calls to me." So when Daland brought the Dutchman into their home, when the man from the portrait stood living before her. Senta froze, breathless, as though a prophecy had stepped out of the painting. The Dutchman, equally stunned, stared at her as if she were an apparition. For the first time in centuries, he felt something stir, something beyond hope and beyond fear. Daland, eager to secure riches, introduced them formally. "This is my daughter, Senta. She is loyal, steadfast, and will make a worthy wife." Senta blushed, but did not look away. In her eyes burned something fierce, not fear, not curiosity, but conviction. The Dutchman told her his fate, his curse, his punishment. She listened without trembling. When he finished, he asked quietly, "Do you believe me?" Senta answered instantly, "I have always believed you." Those words shook him more than any storm he had sailed through. Daland excused himself, leaving them alone. The Dutchman paced the room slowly, unsure if he should speak further, but Senta reached out, gently placing her hand over his. Her touch was warm, his skin was cold, and yet, for a moment, the centuries between them vanished. Not everyone welcomed the Dutchman's arrival. Eric, a local hunter and Senta's former suitor, grew desperate when he learned of her engagement. He confronted her, pleading, "Senta, you cannot marry a stranger. You do not know what he is." But she answered with a calm, haunting resolve, "I know him better than anyone. I know his suffering. It has called to me my whole life." Eric accused her of madness. He begged her to reconsider. He reminded her of their past promises. But Senta had already chosen her path. She belonged to the Dutchman, not by force, not by fear, but by destiny. Eric stormed from the house in despair, unaware that the Dutchman had overheard their exchange. The Dutchman, upon hearing Eric's accusations, felt a familiar coldness crawl through his soul. He believed Senta had betrayed him, just as every hope had betrayed him across the centuries. He turned away from her and whispered, "I cannot endure another false vow." Senta protested, swearing her loyalty. But the Dutchman retreated to the shore and signaled his crew. The Flying Dutchman's ghostly sails unfurled. Glowing in the twilight, thunder rolled across the sky. The curse was awakening. He called out, "Senta, stay with your mortal kind. I release you from your promise." He would rather sail eternally than condemn a human soul to share his torment. But Senta refused to accept this fate. As the Dutchman stepped aboard his ghost ship, Senta ran to the edge of the cliff overlooking the bay. Wind whipped around her. The sea roared below. The Dutchman's ship began to fade into the mist. Senta cried out, "I will be faithful to you until death." And without hesitation, she leapt. Her body plunged into the black water. Her final breath carried only his name. The Dutchman turned in horror, and the curse shattered like glass. For the first time in centuries, his ship began to break apart. Light, brilliant, blinding, poured from the horizon. He saw Senta's spirit rise toward him. Her sacrifice had freed him from his oath. Together, their forms dissolved into light, ascending as the ship finally sank beneath the waves. The Flying Dutchman had found peace, but it came at the price of a mortal life. There are many versions of how the legend of the Flying Dutchman ends. Some say the captain continues to sail forever. Others say he finds no peace, no matter how many lifetimes he searches. But the version that has survived the strongest, the one that blends tragedy, devotion, and the supernatural, is the story of a final storm, a storm unlike any other. A storm in which love and damnation collided. This storm is where the Flying Dutchman met his redemption, and where Senta earned her place in legend. After Senta's confrontation with Eric, the tension around her home thickened like an approaching weather front. Fishermen noticed the wind shifting at unnatural angles. Clouds gathered low, almost touching the mountain peaks. Even the animals sensed it. Birds remained silent. Dogs hid under porches. Boats rocked uneasily at their moorings. It was as if the world was bracing for the arrival of something ancient, something that had crossed oceans for centuries and would not be denied this final moment. When the Dutchman, believing Senta unfaithful, stepped back onto his ghostly deck, the sky cracked open in a violent roar. The storm had come for him, not to punish, not to drown, but to finish the oath he had sworn hundreds of years before. Lightning forked across the sky in white agony. The sea turned black, darker than ink, darker than night itself. The Flying Dutchman's sails, long, shredded, and blood-red, billowed as if filled with screams. The crew, skeletal, glowing, frozen in eternal labor, lifted their heads for the first time in centuries. They did not speak, but their hollow eyes followed the Dutchman as he moved to the helm. He seemed torn between despair, guilt, and the faintest trace of hope Senta had ignited within him. But a cursed man does not trust miracles. A cursed man knows the sea never grants mercy freely. In the storm's howl, he heard the echo of the vow that doomed him. I will round this cape even if it takes until Judgment Day. Judgment Day had come for him at last, on the cliff overlooking the bay. Senta watched the Dutchman's ship emerge fully into the storm, no longer hiding in mist, no longer a whisper of a tale. It was real. It was terrible. It was magnificent. When he turned away from her, convinced she had betrayed him, something inside her broke. But not her devotion, not her purpose. The storm lashed her hair, soaking her dress, but she felt no fear. Her only fear was losing him to eternal suffering. She shouted into the wind, words he could barely hear. I will be faithful to you until death. And then she stepped back from the cliff and leapt. Her body hurtled downward, swallowed instantly by the furious waves below. In that moment, in the silent second between life and death, Senta understood what her destiny had always been. Not to live beside him, but to die for him. Her sacrifice, given freely, carried more power than any oath of pride ever spoken by her cursed beloved. The Dutchman felt the moment she hit the water, not with his eyes, not with his ears, but with something deeper, the same force that had bound him to the sea for centuries. He staggered at the helm, clutching his chest as if stabbed by invisible knives. A sound rose from the depths, not thunder, not waves, but something ancient and mournful. The crew, once frozen, turned toward him. The wind fell silent, the sea held its breath. Then came a blinding flash, not lightning, not fire. A brilliance like daylight breaking open the sky. Senta's sacrifice had shattered the chains binding him. The curse, impossible, eternal, merciless, began to unravel. The ghostly crew let out a sound unheard for centuries. A sigh, a release, a whisper of souls allowed to finally rest. Their spectral forms flickered, their bodies dissolved into mist, one by one. The crew faded into the light. The Dutchman, trembling, stepped forward toward the edge of his ship. There she was. Senta's spirit rose from the storm-torn water, calm, radiant, untouched by the violence around her. Her features seemed carved from light, her hair drifting like smoke in a silent breeze. She extended her hand toward him. For the first time since his curse began, the Dutchman felt warmth. Real warmth. Not wind, not lightning, not the cold fire of the damned. Love, a love stronger than the sea. He stepped forward, touched her hand, and everything around them erupted into light. Witnesses on shore swore they saw two figures, one in a torn Dutch coat, one in a white gown, rise above the deck and merge into the storm's glow. Moments later, the Flying Dutchman's ship groaned like a wounded beast. The hull splintered, the masts buckled, the sails tore free in one final scream. The ghost ship began to sink, not violently, but gracefully, as if lowered by unseen hands into a resting place long denied. With a final roar of thunder, the vessel slipped beneath the waves. The light faded, the storm exhausted itself. The sea calmed, and for the first time since the 1600s, the Flying Dutchman was gone. Truly gone. The next morning, the villagers awoke to a calm, glass-like sea. The sky was clear. The air was still. No wreckage washed ashore. No bodies surfaced. No trace of the ghost ship remained. But an old fisherman reported seeing something unusual at sunrise. Two faint silhouettes walking across the horizon, hand in hand, before fading into the golden haze. He never doubted what he saw. No one else did either. The curse had ended, not through violence, not through ritual, but through loyalty stronger than any vow of arrogance, and through a love pure enough to challenge the heavens themselves. Senta had redeemed the damned. The Dutchman had found peace at last. And the sea finally released its prisoner. When the storm ended and the Flying Dutchman disappeared beneath the waves, the story might have ended there, sealed in myth, swallowed by the sea, remembered only in songs and whispered superstition. But it didn't. Instead, the legend of the Flying Dutchman grew stronger with every century that followed. It became a haunting presence in maritime folklore, then in literature, then in opera, then in films and pop culture across the world. A story that refused to sink, just as the ghost ship once refused to drown. This final chapter traces the Dutchman's long shadow, from the earliest sailor sightings to the way the legend shaped modern imagination, long after Senta's legendary sacrifice, long after the Dutchman supposedly found peace. Sailors continued to report encounters with a strange, impossible vessel, drifting in storms, glowing in the fog, always vanishing before contact. These sightings didn't fade with time. They intensified. 1803. Cape of Good Hope. A British merchant ship reported a ghost ship with blood-red sails racing through rough seas. The crew panicked, praying aloud until the apparition vanished. 2 days later, the merchant ship suffered a broken mast in a freak squall. 35. The Royal Navy account. Perhaps the most famous sighting came from the British Navy. A midshipman recorded, "A strange red light lit the masts of a phantom vessel. She passed our bow at great speed, but cast no shadow on the water." This young officer would later become King George V. His logs remain preserved in naval archives. 1881. HMS Bacchante. Off the coast of Australia, sailors saw a hull of glowing blue fire. The lookout who spotted it first fell from the mast and died hours later. The crew interpreted it as the Dutchman's curse taking its due. 1896. The Tasmanian sightings. Fishing vessels near Storm Bay reported a silent ship made of mist, gliding faster than any modern schooner. One captain swore the ship sailed directly against the wind. All these accounts carried one consistent message. The Dutchman remained a symbol of doom, a bad omen, a warning from the sea. Even after his supposed redemption, the legend clung to maritime culture as something alive, restless, unfinished. By the early 19th century, as global shipping expanded, writers began weaving the Dutchman's ghostly presence into stories, poems, and plays. In 1821, Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine published the first detailed written account, cementing the legend in Western literature. Soon afterward, the Flying Dutchman became a trope. The doomed traveler, the eternal wanderer, the soul trapped between worlds. Coleridge's influence. Although Samuel Taylor, Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, is not directly about the Dutchman. Its themes, punishment, oceanic damnation, supernatural judgment, echoed the lore and helped spread it to English audiences. Novels and maritime journals. The 1800s saw dozens of books, naval diaries, and sailor memoirs referencing the ghost ship. Captains spoke of the Dutchman with a mixture of fear and respect. To see him meant fate had already chosen your end. Richard Wagner's opera Der Fliegende Holländer forever transformed the myth. Instead of a purely cursed captain, Wagner crafted a tragic hero, damned by pride, yet yearning for freedom. He introduced Senta, the woman whose loyal love could break the curse. Wagner's version infused the story with themes of salvation, sacrifice, destiny, and the power of unwavering devotion. This romanticized retelling spread through Europe like wildfire. Audiences were mesmerized by the storm scenes, the ghostly chorus of sailors, and the Dutchman's tortured longing for release. From 1843 onward, the Flying Dutchman became more than a maritime omen. It became a symbol of tragic love. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the Dutchman evolved again, taking new forms across media. Pirates of the Caribbean, 2000s, the Dutchman became a massive, coral-encrusted vessel ruled by Davy Jones, guardian of drowned souls. While not historically accurate, the films reintroduced the myth to worldwide audiences. SpongeBob SquarePants, a humorous version of the Flying Dutchman, appeared as a recurring ghostly character, showing how far the story had permeated popular culture. Novels, comics, video games, dozens of adaptations recast the Dutchman as a demon ship, a cursed ferryman, a storm spirit, a wandering captain, unable to die. No version matched the next, yet all shared the same core. The Dutchman is cursed to roam the sea forever. Across cultures, the Flying Dutchman came to symbolize pride punished, a captain who defied heaven, cycles of self-destruction, the curse repeating every 7 years, unfinished business, the eternal wanderer, death at sea, maritime souls who never return home. For sailors, it became a lesson. Respect the ocean, respect the storm. Do not challenge what you do not understand, because the sea has no mercy for arrogance. Historians continue to debate whether Hendrik van der Decken or Bernard Folke truly existed. There are records of a Folke who sailed unusually fast voyages for the Dutch East India Company. So fast, rivals accused him of witchcraft. Other logs mention a captain who swore never to turn back at the Cape, but no single figure can be tied definitively to the legend. Instead, the myth likely grew from sailors' fear of unexplained storms, ships lost without trace, optical illusions caused by heat and fog, mirages known as Fata Morgana, and the loneliness of long voyages. Reality and myth fused into one, and the Dutchman became the ultimate maritime ghost. Even in modern times, strange sightings continue. Radar occasionally picks up phantom returns. Ships report lights in fog banks that vanish on approach. Lighthouse keepers off the Cape swear they've seen sails glowing blue at dawn. In 2004, a cargo vessel near Namibia reported a 18th century ship drifting at impossible speed, seen by 14 crew members. It vanished moments later, the Flying Dutchman endures, not because he still sails, but because the sea still holds his memory. The Flying Dutchman remains one of humanity's most enduring maritime myths because it contains all the elements of a perfect ghost story. A proud man punished, a ship swallowed by storms, a curse stronger than death, a woman whose love defied fate, sightings spanning centuries, and a mystery the ocean refuses to yield. The Dutchman may have found peace through Senta's sacrifice, or he may still roam the waters, searching for salvation in an endless storm. Every version ends differently. Every storyteller adds their own wave to the sea, but all agree on one final truth. If you see a ship glowing red or blue in a storm, if it moves against the wind, if its sails flap without sound, turn back. Do not answer. Do not take anything from its crew. Do not speak, because some voyages never end, some captains never rest, and some ghosts are still out there.